Let's dig right into why everyone has a podcast. First, quickly introduce yourselves. Devin, you first.
I'm Devin Emery. I'm the president of Morning Brew, which is a media company that started about 10 years ago as a newsletter company. And over the past 2 to 3 years, we've been focusing on building out to be a more diversified, multi-platform media company focused in work, business, and money.
But before we move on, Devin, talk about being Forbes 30 under 30. Talk about Curiosity Stream, Cheddar, all that. Just a little bit more about how you got to where you're at.
Totally. So I'm one of the few Forbes 30 under 30 who is still outside of jail, which is very exciting. I know it's a big accomplishment. So I've been working in media and entertainment for most of my career. Been on the platform side with Google, been in startup world, been at Cheddar. We did for about 3 years, which was a great ride of trying to turn what is the next generation of news. What is that going to look like? And then also spending some time right before I was at Morning Brew. I was at a company called Curiosity Stream, which is a streaming video on demand service that was started by the guy who started Discovery Communications, but was not related to Discovery Communications, but was across the street from Discovery Communications. There's a lot that goes into that. And there was working on building out a subscription streaming service, but also working very closely with a company called Nebula, which we helped to launch, which is a collection of YouTubers who wanted to build into the creator economy more. So, have their own streaming service, have their own podcast platform, have their own ecosystem. And so I've been in the creator and podcasting and media space in a variety of different ways for quite a while.
All right, touchy question. Please be honest. You've done a lot in YouTube. You've done a lot with direct streaming. I guess maybe that's called OTT. You've done a lot with newsletters. You've done a lot with podcasts. Even though this is a podcast session, what is your favorite media format?
YouTube is the platform and allows for the most formats, and is, as anyone who looks at the Nielsen streaming gauge, is absolutely eating the world. So I would say that if you had to pick one platform that gave you the most stuff at this moment in time, it would be YouTube.
YouTube or Spotify?
YouTube.
YouTube or LinkedIn?
YouTube.
Dang. All right. YouTube convert. Nick.
Great to be here. First of all, thank you everyone for being here later than late. Thank you for putting on this entire thing. This is absolutely incredible. Having a round of applause for what you guys did. And how many speakers were there? So, congrats on that. I'm Nick Martell. I am helping that event. So, employee to show a code Jack that and
Hold up. First is you started off with newsletters. Then you went to podcast, and then you started doing a lot on YouTube. And I see your stuff on LinkedIn. What's the media format you like the most?
okay, the media format, I would straight up say it's audio, just pure audio. And I say that having a video component and us pushing hard on video and thinking YouTube is absolutely not the future, it's everything. But the one, because with audio, we're limited to one sense. So it's got to multitask by doing it. But when you're doing audio, you are friend, you're allied, you're that person fun.
I believe you met your co-founder at Wharton.
Actually, I like with founder in college, undergrad, freshman year roommate. They told them about to a while. A best friend started a newsletter side of us, outside of thank you.
Sounds a little bit like Morning Brew, but we're going to come back to this.
And eventually that became a podcast. Podcast newsletter from Robin. Did with Ross in New York City with San Francisco. We were at Rob Goodfoot for absolutely 3 years. And like 300 people at 3,000. The whole move starts done. And then 3 years ago, Jack and spun off entrepreneurship, rebranded as successful. Yes, thank you.
Okay, so prior to this, a few minutes ago, we were just talking about how in some ways you guys are competitors. How much do you look at his metrics and vice versa? And like you said, there's a third potential player in this space. How big is the business podcast space? And maybe we need to dial in on more business podcast.
It's funny you say say competitors. I you respect for Kevin. And he was so good to have seen, especially coaching in the side of I mean, you get 10 years human. And they've gone to this greater with the I just think it's when it comes to looking at where you're at, we have a lot out of this space. Honestly, we barely. And I remember getting this on business slowdown. We try to focus on our core brand strategy that we built out, brand strategy, and just go on that. Build up everything is a part. We basically call it for not just data set. And you know, every single day, how can we do the best with
I would say our approach is very similar. I have even told when people ask how do we think about what we launch internally as new franchises, they're like, well, we already have a personal finance brand, so we're not going to launch another one. I was like, we might, because the way that we're building now and the way that you build podcast audiences, the way that you build creator focused audiences in general, is there is so much that goes into whether or not the audience is going to connect with you that is not just the topics that you are covering. And so it's the exact same with us, is that I spend very little time looking at the competition with an eye towards are they doing something that I want to copy? Obviously understanding what everyone is doing and, you know, making sure that you know what's going on in general is very important. But when it comes to people like the best one yet, or, you know, anyone else that's doing something very similar, I often look for allyships more than I look for, you know, competition that needs to be kind of head to head and that sort of thing, because there's so much room. We are so far away from anything that looks at all like saturation, that you don't really have to think too much about the externalities. You think a lot about the internalities.
So let's get everyone here subscribed to your podcast.
Yes.
Real quick, right before this, I subscribed on Spotify. I followed on YouTube. And to your point, I really wasn't seeing much of your content. So why should these folks subscribe to Morning Brew Daily and the best one yet? You first, Devin.
Morning Brew Daily. We record it every single morning. I make my team get up at 4 a.m. That is not a joke. So just for them having to wake up at 4 a.m. every single weekday, they deserve a subscribe for that. We are taking everything that happened the day before, getting it as fresh to, you know, the minute it goes out on the feeds around 7 a.m. And so it is a great, you know, if you want the business headlines, it is about a half hour, a little bit less. It's a great rundown with Neil and Toby, who have a great rapport.
And I want to say it's not just news, it's done in a funny, engaging way.
Jack and I believe that the currency that our generation trades with is interesting information, whether it's in a boardroom or whether it's at brunch with your friends. So every day on the best one yet, we curate the most interesting, exciting, and fun business news stories out there with the goal of one word. And this is our internal word. We don't share this publicly. So this all stays in this room. But our secret brand word is brighter. The idea that we make you feel smarter and happier with the fun, the interesting, the chemistry, and the takeaways that Jack and I whip up every day. So with the best one yet, you finish the 20-minute episode, you feel brighter, you feel happier, you feel smarter, because we just told you that story about the Abercrombie & Fitch $100 wedding dress that just saved their entire quarter. So that's what we do on T-Boy.
Bunch of creators in the room, bunch of creators who know that an obstacle to creating content is production quality. How much do you think you need to spend to have a decent podcast? Be real, microphones and all that setup.
Not very much. You can't have bad audio. That's the biggest thing. But there are relatively inexpensive setups that will get you to the level of audio quality. And as Nick was just talking about in terms of the audio being a medium that is really important, I do think that when you're thinking about podcasting and starting something out, really focusing in on, is this an audio first podcast, and really making sure that if it is, that it's something that you're building with that in mind. It does not take a lot from production expenses to be able to get there.
I totally agree. In fact, I'm sure one thing Devin and I probably both noticed is how big media companies spend way too much on podcasts. Like the New York Times Daily, great show. When I hear the number of credits involved on the production, I am shocked. because we run with a 4-person operation. I mean, 4 full-timers, but you can run a pretty lean operation as a podcast, as a full-time professional podcast. And if it's a side hustle or as a creator, you want to dabble with it, you're looking at $2,000 for the absolute top equipment. If you want to DM me, I'm happy to share with you exactly what we use. We've used the same equipment for 6 years. We travel with all of that equipment. I think one thing that people forget about when they're launching a podcast, and Devin just brought up the audio quality is key, because that's the only sense you get if it's purely podcasting, is that editing is not a commodity. And first of all, as a creator, I don't think you should be editing your podcast, because I don't think that's a proper, effective use of your time. You can find a freelancer. There are plenty of editors out there. But the mistake a lot make is that every editor is the same. The reality is that editors are kind of like the 5th Beatle. You know, like how there were 4 Beatles, but everyone says the 5th Beatle was the producer. We work with editors only who have comedy backgrounds. And the reason is we need them to understand, Jackson, my timing on jokes, pauses, and exactly what to polish and not polish. So when it comes to editors, you don't just want to grab anyone online. If you're doing more of an entertainment style, like we do entertainment style business news, we want someone with a comedy background who gets the timing. If you're working in more of a journalism creator industry, you're going to want someone who understands like the legitimacy, quality, depth, the intensity of tones. And I think that's important to keep in mind.
One other thing I'll add that you brought up, which I think is a really important point, when it comes to large media companies, but just in general, polish can be your enemy in certain points, where oftentimes people are going to connect with you because doesn't feel like you've just taken television or a very polished radio show and then put it out on an RSS feed. They're looking for, what is that connection? And so the point of, you went through it quickly, but the fact that you guys are making decisions on what do we polish and what do we not polish, the what do we not polish part is such an incredibly important part as well.
The way I engage with podcasts is exercising, driving, doing chores. How are your listeners engaging with podcasts? Is it they just stop and that's like now you're their Walter Cronkite? Like, how is that? How are they engaging with your podcast?
One of the things that I found very funny after a while is that I was able to predict, not exactly, but with pretty good certainty of if we were going to be hitting a top download day or a lower download day based on how crowded the Path train station platform was when I was going to work. And for us, what I found is that commuting, we became very much a part of people's morning routines. And so a lot of that is commuting to work. We see a lot of people are saying that it is working out, it's walking their dog in the morning. We obviously can be listened to at any point, but we do find that because we are so morning focused, Morning Brew, Morning Brew Daily, morning focused, that we do integrate into whatever people's morning routine is as our primary way that people are consuming us.
It's a habit medium. It is absolutely a habit medium. And that informs the kind of content you create. And there are actually some tricks that we've used similarly to make sure that we're finding our way into people's habits. Because with a podcast, you're going to listen every day when you're in the gym. You're going to be listening every day when you're on that commute on the Path train. The key is, like, as the creator, are there things you can do to kind of trigger people to do that? And absolutely there are. So, like, strategically, some things Jack and I do psychologically is we once had this joke that we did a story about how puppy adoption had taken off and like businesses that were taking advantage of that and how spending on puppies like never goes down. We called it like people ultimately prioritize puppies. Yeah. And we ended up having a bark during that story. That was kind of funny. So people DM'd us and were saying, hey, I was so funny how you included that sound effect, reminded me of my dog. We ended up using that sound effect as the halfway point in the podcast. And what we would say is, if you're on a run, when you hear the bark, that's the signal that you're halfway through the show. And that was like this huge driver of engagement for like 3 months. Eventually, we kind of phased it out because, certain things lose novelty and you have to be okay letting go of things as a creator. But for us, it was like dropping in little things that remind people, oh, yeah, you should be listening to us on a run. We should be part of your morning run. We will lean into that and become a more fun part of your morning run.
Let's talk about the differences of how you all approach. So you're the face of the podcast.
Yes.
You hire the faces of the podcast, but you also, from what I've read recently, have a unique structure with the faces of the podcast. Maybe it's not just like employee, but maybe there's like a equity component or revenue share component. Can you maybe talk about that and then how difficult it is to consistently pump out great content?
Certainly. So Neil and Toby, they are the co-hosts of the podcast. They are also Neil is the executive editor of the Morning Brew newsletter, and Toby is our head of editorial social. And they were doing that before they were doing the podcast. And when we were launching Morning Brew Daily, which was pretty soon into when I came into Morning Brew, we looked at a lot of people and we looked for a lot of people that could really build out the show that we wanted to be. And it just so happened that, the people who are going to be able to get the tone and the approach and the voice of what we wanted to build as Morning Brew, which is critically important for us, were going to be people who, as I was just saying, were not the most polished presenters. There was a lot of work that we did with them to get them to be more polished, but even now, they're not the people that you're going to tune into on TV to listen to. But they do integrate very fully into the overall Morning Brew ecosystem. And then something that I have implemented across the board at Morning Brew is that everyone who works on content at Morning Brew in one way or another is attached to the financial success of the content that they are working on. So for Morning Brew Daily, there is talent participation on the profits that we make from that, but also the production team. The production team is also in that pool. When you look at any of the other franchises that we have, if you are creating content at Morning Brew, part of your compensation is going to get higher if we make more money on it. And I think that that is something that is very important to build. And my overall philosophy on building a media company today is that if you want to really be a creator media company, you have to figure that out. You have to figure out how do you build structures so that the people who are building that value with and for you get to be able to see that, so you don't end up in a place where we saw a lot of media companies who had really great creative talent, who put a lot of work in, created 7-figure revenue and 8-figure enterprise value IP, and then at the end of the year, they got a promotion for $10,000 and a pat on the back. That's not the way that it can work, and so we do have those structures in place to make sure that people are participating.
It's so fascinating. I want you to respond, but I think that is the future of big media because, I mean, just I'm thinking about the Try Guys, BuzzFeed. I'm thinking about other notable folks from CNN to other publications. They build a big brand, but then they leave and they don't get much of that or uh, sharing the value creation.
Absolutely. I mean, Jack and I have a funny position wherever we're on calls because we are the creators, we're the quote unquote the talent, and like our talent agent will be with us, but we're also the 50-50 owners of the business. So we're also on the call negotiating the deals themselves. And we've just been told it's kind of a bizarre thing for a lot of companies we work with. But Jack and I really, while we love the business side, we went to business school, we're former finance guys, the creator side is our identity. And as a creator, how many people here are creators? Just so I can get a sense. Like, raise your hand. If you're, are you creating content on a weekly or daily basis? Raise your hand. All right, great. You know how unappreciated and how hard that job is. The analogy Jack and I like to use is that every day we're like chefs. We go to the market. We see what's fresh. We try to figure out, okay, what tastes good? What is our audience going to like to be served tonight? Then we go back and we spend the entire day in the kitchen cutting up the fish, getting rid of the heads, churning the broth, cooking the meat, and coming up with a meal for you that we're going to serve up. And for so many people, just like going to a restaurant, you don't think about all that went into the production leading up to that 30-minute meal you had. But that's content production. It is going to the farmer's market. It is meeting with the farmers. It is figuring out what you're going to serve that night and then spending the entire day cooking it up. So when it comes to like the structure that we think works, I mean, I couldn't agree more. It's the equity that's exciting, we always say. That's the key part. But as a content creator, you have to just love and appreciate the art form, the meal you are creating to make other people happy every day. And that's the other half of the equation that is just really important to keep in mind.
The last session was on newsletters. This is on podcast. You started with newsletters. Morning Brew started with newsletters. And in fact, my understanding is that Devin came and then Morning Brew started podcast. And it was like kind of correlation and causation, or maybe both. What would you recommend to creators? Start with newsletters, then similarly what you guys evolved to podcast, or actually no, go podcast first?
I would say that there is no rule. The way that we look at building franchises or talent, we do not have a set of distribution platforms that we need to be on. What I always say is that we will be multi-platform, but we don't need to be ubiquitously platformed for everything that we're doing. Dan Toomey, who the last panel tried to steal from me, if you guys remember, didn't work. But he is someone who does really well in video, and he does really well in long form video. And so his franchise is built around long form video. Morning Brew Daily obviously is built as hero new podcast content that is meant to go really well with our newsletter. But the reality is that you have to look at what are your strengths, what do you like doing, and where do you think that you're going to be able to get across what you want to get across in the best possible way, and then build into those mediums. And then once you have that down or very comfortable with it, there are going to be expansion opportunities. But I would never say that the path on which platforms to launch with and then which platforms to expand in are going to be standard for any person.
One thing I always tell people about starting a podcast is that there are low barriers to entry, but there are high barriers to scale. And so you can get it off the ground, but it's hard to figure out what exactly your growth hack is going to be. And there are a bunch that we could get into about that. Or, of course, you could DM me, and I'm happy to share those with you one-on-one. With newsletters, it is kind of a similar thing. There are low barriers to starting the newsletter, higher barriers to scaling it. Although with newsletters, you get the ability of, there are more kind of tech techniques, referral programs, like we mentioned earlier, that used to be really, really powerful for this. I think at the end of the day, when you're choosing from a content creator perspective, which one you're going to focus on, the question is going to be going back to that currency of our generation. How do you create the most interesting content? What medium is that going to live on? And Jack and I believe the formula for interesting content is bold plus specific. It's how can I say something that is a bold opinion, and how can I get a very specific story out of all the noise in the news out there? So, for example, I mentioned a story we did the other day on the $100 wedding dress that Abercrombie made that saved their quarter. Abercrombie had earnings. Everyone covered it. We went into the earnings report and noticed the CEO like referenced in one paragraph this like wedding dress, and like it happened to be like $98, and like attributed a lot of success to that. So we ended up not telling the story of everything that happened to Abercrombie last quarter, everything in their earnings, like traditional media would. We focused on that one bold, specific story, the $100 wedding dress that saved Abercrombie and Fitch, and that was a story that we felt we could best deliver in a podcast medium. And that's why we've really made our business all about podcasting. So a question I'd ask yourself before you start focusing on which medium you're doing, where can you deliver the best bold and specific story?
This is going to sound like a media neophyte question, but I'm still going to ask it. When I think of newsletters, I think super tactical, super direct response. And when I think of podcasts, I think almost opposite end, like you want to brand yourself as a thought leader. Would you say that is a good way of thinking about it, or no, there's much more subtleties to that?
In terms of thinking about yourself in that?
Yes.
I don't think it necessarily has to be that way, and I think it could go in a lot of different directions. Both of those mediums can be so broad in how they are executed that they will lend themselves to differences between that, but I don't think you have to necessarily categorize them as one or the other.
Yeah, there's a lot of real estate inbox out there. Like, let's just also sprinkle on some context here, as Jack likes to say. Everyone has an inbox. That's just like a lot of real estate. And everyone receives newsletters. The reality is the podcast market is not that huge yet. Like, our bet is that it will continue to grow. And we think it will be in the same way radio has. As much as people will eventually be using virtual reality, there's always going to be a need for multitasking, and that will always require audio. So our bet is that long-term podcasting keeps growing, but it is still a significantly smaller portion of the world than you realize. Something like, I think it's like a third of podcast listeners have a master's degree. Like, that is a very niche segment of the United States. So when you're thinking about like the two, like absolutely, newsletter is more tactical. It also is just a bigger market. It's easier to share a newsletter. There are more growth opportunities with a newsletter. Podcasting is an uphill battle in a lot of ways, unless you can find that one growth lever that's going to help you grow. So it is something to keep in mind, is that you're likely to see more satisfying growth with a newsletter product than with a podcast one. But when you can crack podcasting, get people to connect with your personality, encourage them to share, build up the word of mouth, get on other shows so that guesting helps drive people to your show. All of these things eventually can kind of create some momentum, but newsletter is stronger for tactical and just the reality that there's just more real estate in people's inboxes.
I'll stop with the newsletter podcast comparison. Let's focus on why everyone has a podcast. You've mentioned it twice, growth. Let's talk about growth, because growth for a lot of people coming into podcasts is really tricky. It's like, is it the like, comment, subscribe? There's got to be more than that. Can you share growth tactics?
Yeah, there are a bunch of growth tactics. Jack and I kind of have like a fun bag of them that we play with all the time. I'll start with kind of like the more fun growth hacks so we can get into something more fundamental too. But one thing that really drove engagement for our show and drove word of mouth early on is we borrowed an idea from Peloton. Anyone here taking a Peloton ride, and they're like, hey, Julie, 1,000th ride, and it's like really exciting. So we started having people submit birthday shout outs and anniversary shout outs and just sending them our way. And we got so many, we kind of had to cap it. But every day we curate at the end of the show about a minute's worth of shouting out people for different bat mitzvahs. So someone asked for a shout out the other day for a vasectomy. It is a wide range. And that little kind of trick at the end, one, it gives people a fun incentive to listen. Even if they're not getting a shout out, it made them feel brighter at the end of the show. Two, it really made them share the show. And so for us, that if you didn't want to hear that, you just wanted the business news, you could stop listening at minute 19. But for people who stayed the extra minute, it was a powerful reason to share. Another one we did was the best fact yet. Every day at the end of the show, we share the best fact yet. And users submit that with their voice memos, and that was another reason to share. Now, those are kind of hacky growth hack ideas for sharing podcasts. And on the word of mouth side, the other two things that really powerfully drove us were, one, when we sold to Robinhood, Jack and I like to say we like sail to scale. Being a part of Robinhood was a powerful growth driver for us. It's not the opportunity every podcaster has, but it's an example of how a powerful partner feeding you audience is just a wonderfully powerful way to grow. But really, the other value we found has been on the free sample. A lot of times podcast hosts appear on other shows. That doesn't necessarily mean you're going to get audience to your show. If we appear on another show and Jack and I tell our entrepreneurial backstories, that's fun for us, but it doesn't drive people to our show because the sample they got on that show is different from what our show is about, which is business news. So the key is going full Costco style. And if you're going to guest on other shows and get exposed to their audience, you need to give the free sample of your show. People need to know that when they go to your show, their expectations are going to be met. What they heard when you guested on another show is what they're going to get on your show. So guesting is a powerful way to grow, but you have to do it the right way. Envision the Costco free sample.
What I'll add on to that, completely agree with all of it, is something that you mentioned earlier is it's really easy to start a podcast. It is very hard to break through in a podcast. And word of mouth is still what drives a lot of the compounding long-term growth in podcasts. And so as you're thinking about starting a podcast, we're no longer in a world, and we haven't been for a while, where first mover advantage exists in the audio space. We're still very early. The industry is going to grow significantly, but just setting up a podcast is not then going to randomly have you in front of thousands, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of people. So as you're thinking about, should I have a podcast, think a lot about why would someone want you to have a podcast? You have to think about why you want it, but you also have to think, what are people going to get from it? And before you can pull any of these engagement levers, before you can pull any of the 10 to 100 levers, you have to get 0 to 1. And that really is creating something that when one person shares it to one other person, you have a pretty good hit rate of that one person maybe being interested in the content that you're creating. And then when 10 people are sharing it with 10 people, that's how it will compound. And from the just very getting off the ground floor of podcast, that does not mean that your first episode has to be what the 100th episode is going to be, or that it has to be, the most amazing thing that you've ever created. But it does mean you have to think a lot about, am I creating this because I really understand how it will drive value for who I want my audience to be? Or are you creating it because people have said a podcast can be beneficial? And when you flip that mentality of how you're creating the actual content, then once you pull some of these levers, that will compound instead of feel like a very slow growth trajectory, because people will then get excited about what you have created.
How much time do you all spend creation versus distribution versus monetization? Is it purely a third? And like, how do you separate the human labor aspect?
So Jack and I like to say that content is king, curation is queen. And as creators, you're all in the curation game. You're all tastemakers. So you're going to be creating content that is curated. When it comes to the time that we spend on creating that content, that curated content, for Jack and I, it's the whole day. I'll give you just a rundown of our day. Basically, I'm up at 5 a.m. Pacific time, go for a run. Then before my family's up and our baby, I'm doing an hour of searching for potential stories. Then family gets together, we do breakfast. Then I'm down at the Ferry building where we record from. Jack and I are on a phone call. We do our headline hammer where we choose out of 30, 40 potential stories, what's our fantastic, perfect mix. You know, maybe it's this Coinbase story, maybe this technology that creates rain. So we figure out our mix. Then we set aside an hour for biz dev calls, 2 half-hour slots. If we've got a biz dev call, it's got to be in that 1 hour slot. Then we go to the content creation, spend the next 3-4 hours creating our own content, fact-checking each other. Then we spend 2 hours recording in the afternoon, send it to our editor. Our magical editor combines the files and turns it into a 20-minute show, and that wraps up at like 6, 7 p.m. Now, when it comes to the business itself, Jack and I found ways to strategically outsource some things. So on the biz dev side, we were able to secure talent agents at UTA. They basically do all our biz dev and legal work. On the advertising side, we have a production deal with Wondery, which is owned by Amazon. They now do all of our ad sales. And basically, Jack and I found our goal is to find the perfect people to run those elements so we can focus on making the best content that we can every day. So the way the operation works is we've now offloaded a lot of that, and that leaves Jack and I with the burden of basically management and helping secure and seal deals, kind of coming in at the last stage, and really focusing 90% of our day on creating and performing the content.
We do all of that stuff in-house, but I think the theory behind it is exactly the same because we have sales teams that are monetizing, we have distribution and growth teams that are growing it, but the production teams are focusing almost all of their effort on creating the content. And I think that is the really important piece of it because, you know, there's always the distribution versus product conversation, but when you're creating a podcast, when you're creating content, that is where most of the effort needs to go because it is true that if you have a really, really solid product, you can find people, you can find situations, and you can find businesses that'll work around that product. And so, you know, you're not integrated in a media company like Morning Brew is necessarily really focusing in most of that time on build that great product and then find those people who can help on the other areas is the right way to go.
Yeah, the other analogy I heard for this is rocks and sand. So as a creator, your day is going to be filled with rocks and sand. The rocks are the really important things. If you fill your jar of a day with sand, you're not going to have space for the rocks. You need to do the rocks first, and then the sand will find its way through. So basically, everything content related are the rocks in our day. I have to do my story sourcing before 6 a.m. I have to do our headline hammer, where Jack and I decide on that fantastic mix of stories. We have to do our content creation, and then we have to do the actual show recording at 2 p.m. Pacific. Everything else has to fit into that. So if we're running late on something, we never prioritize the biz dev call or the ad sales call. That has to wait until another day. Everything content creation related, that cannot change on a daily basis.
Love the rocks and sand analogy. I'm just thinking about my day. I'm just like stuck in sand.
And I feel like the military probably had something like that, right?
Totally. I mean, the most important thing is done in the morning.
Yeah.
And that's physical fitness in the military. Going back to growth, shorts. Like in our small podcast, we get all of our distribution through cutting the podcast up, putting them into shorts, and then giving the most juicy spots, and then posting it on LinkedIn and YouTube Shorts. Do you all do that? Does that work? Do you all see that as a growth driver or monetization, or no? That's what amateurs do.
I definitely see shorts and short form as a wonderful way to give that free sample idea. And so that absolutely makes sense. We do the exact same thing. That reminds me, though, of like one myth for creators that I just want to squash here. There is a sense that our entire generation has lost its attention span, and that anything you create goes viral, has legitimacy, is going to work in this world, has to be sub 50 seconds or Gen Z doesn't give a shit. The reality is, how many people here watched Game of Thrones? Yeah, that wasn't very short, was it? Pretty long. I think what's important to think about is that it's not that attention spans have changed, it's our tolerance for wasting time that has changed. So you can produce longer form content that still goes viral, that still develops a deep, deep following. It doesn't have to be cut into shorts in order for it to be successful for young people. What young people don't like is because there is so much distraction in this world is having their time wasted. So spending an hour on a show that's not interesting, that's a waste of time. That's what's annoying. So keep that in mind. And we've had evidence of this at T-Boy. We have a daily show, new show, the best one yet, 20 minutes. We also launched this year the best idea yet, which is 1 hour deep dive episodes on the most viral products of all time. We just did an episode on Juicy Couture. We did the Starbucks Frappuccino. There's a great one on Google Maps. The retention rates, the percentage of the podcast that is completed by listeners is the same for both, over 90%. So the listenership engages with both shows the same, even though one is literally 3 or 4 times longer than the other. And I think it reflects just this broader myth that we hear, which is like, attention spans are gone. Attention spans aren't gone. It's just the standards, the expectations for not wasting time. That's what's changed.
I would also, my philosophy on using other platforms to grow your brand is that Morning Brew Daily is our flagship podcast. It is an audio first product and it does really well on the audio feeds. We create video content. The full episodes are video. We create short form video. Some of that short form is clipped from the show. Some of that is custom made for short feeds, and we create long form YouTube style programming. So the idea is that we want to build a content ecosystem around the show, of which we know that the podcast, at least currently and probably for the foreseeable future, is the hero of what Morning Brew Daily is. But when I think about shorts, I don't think about just promoting that a podcast exists. I think about what is Morning Brew Daily in a 60 to 120 second bite-size format. Exactly as you were just saying, it's not that people are trying to just like cram everything into that, but people are on those feeds. So what is your version of what you are creating for that feed? And I also feel very strongly that trying to use social or video platforms to get someone on that platform to go to a different platform to do something else is a massive waste of time. If someone is scrolling through a content feed, that is what they have decided that they're going to be doing at the moment. So they're not going to, unless you give them a really solid reason, and obviously sometimes people do this, but they're not usually going to see your video come up in their feed. Maybe they've never seen you before, and then go decide to check out your podcast. Now, if they really like that video that you've put in their shorts feed and has given them something, and then they start to understand that Morning Brew Daily or T-Boy is an entity and that there's more to it than just that, over time, your likelihood of getting them into more of your ecosystem goes up dramatically. And so I typically recommend don't try to use content, if you're creating content as just promotion. Create content that is really going to resonate, that is the same ethos of what you are building, but native for where the audience is. And then over time, you're going to be able to get them into other parts of your ecosystem, but you're not going to be able to get them to move on the first time they've seen you.
It's like that. Obviously, you've heard of people talk about like top of funnel. It's like the idea of like Instagram being top of funnel for your podcast. You're saying that doesn't exist. That's not the way to think about it, right?
It could potentially work like that to an extent, but what it is not is a one-to-one promote your podcast, then they're going to come to it. Yeah. I kind of think about it as tranches. And so in my view, you could call it maybe top of funnel, but I think what you're saying, I very much agree with. It's kind of like there are tranches that will have higher reach and then people will move inward, but not every single person will. And I'm also totally fine that if there is an audience member out there who is watching Morning Brew Daily shorts on Reels or YouTube Shorts, and they're doing it every day, and they don't end up listening to the podcast, I want people to listen to the podcast. But if that's how they're engaging with us, I don't feel like that is a bad thing because that is how they're using their media diet. I want the people who do want to get to that innermost tranche to get there, but I don't want to force them there. If that's the way that they want to interact with us, that's okay.
So start preparing your questions. I'm going to ask maybe 1 or 2 more, and your questions can be on any subject. These folks know newsletters, podcasts, investing, getting acquired.
I make great omelets.
Omelets.
I make popovers. I've got a good popover recipe.
running in the morning, making people get up at 4. Lots of different questions you can ask. A few things. One that I found really interesting. One, you said attention spans. Some of the longest podcasts are the most successful ones. Acquired, Joe Rogan, Jocko Willink. Second is the vibe I've gotten throughout this entire day is that this is kind of like journalism meshed into one day, a journalism like course, plus like what acting classes might have been in the past around like how do you like create the content, how you
Yeah.
distribute it, because I think like all those things are now outdated. And I don't think creators are going to grad school or undergrad to figure out how to be creators, which is kind of why we put this event together. My question is the future of podcasting. Both of you have alluded to it during this interview that you think we're at the beginning stages. Whereas me, that's not involved, I'm like, maybe we're at like peak podcast. So would love to hear your thoughts.
I will start that by saying that I think the future of audio podcasts and the future of video podcasts are two different things. Not that they are totally separate, but if you look at YouTube, YouTube would tell you that they're the biggest podcasting platform in the world. They are a big one, but they also call anything that is people talking a podcast. And as Nick was saying at the very beginning of this, there is a intimacy to audio that is not the same as watching a podcast on video. And so there is going to be a difference between when you're looking at what talk shows in video formats are very successful and what audio first podcasts are going to be. And one of the interesting things to navigate right now is that platforms have, as we all know, a lot of control over what is going on. Spotify really wants to push their video products right now. And Spotify pushing their video products is not really a great thing for audio first podcasts at the moment. Not that it's a terrible or killer thing, but it is something where if you have audio ecosystems and those audio ecosystems then are pushing, different formats and different mediums, it is something that needs to be navigated. So my view is that I very much agree. Podcasting is still at its, I love its infancy, but it's still not where it's going to be just because it isn't ubiquitous yet. And eventually it will be something that feels pretty ubiquitous, not in that they're going to be individual shows that necessarily every single person is listening to, but it is something that people, are going to use more and more. And they're going to blend together, audio. If you look at Audible, they're doing a lot of audio entertainment, and there's a area between what is an audiobook and what is a podcast, all that sort of stuff. And then there's going to be obviously the video side of it as well. And so YouTube, even Netflix has been, heard kicking tires on, do we bring video podcasts onto the platform? And so as you think about it, I would view it primarily, the future of podcasting is going to be essentially the future of audio, but also in a sense, talk type content. So you look at, Joe Rogan, you look at a lot of his other stuff, they're talk shows, and talk shows, have worked on TV, but a lot of the most popular talk shows of the past have been in the radio format. And so as all of that is growing, I think that as the platforms are trying to get people to do what they want, which is to extend the time that they're on the platform, there is going to be multiple different futures of what we refer to as podcasting. And I think we need to define what we call all these different things, because it's not really an umbrella term.
No, you're absolutely right. I mean, we've joked around that it's blend casting, because it's like, where do you draw the line? It almost is like they could have just, YouTube just said, what the heck, we'll call it podcasting. Age-wise, it's almost like, I guess we could say podcasting is in its puberty phase. It's not infancy, but it's a little awkward. It's still growing. It's like figuring things out. It just looks a little weird. So that's kind of where it is right now. Love everything Devin just said. I guess I'll share another side of what the future of podcasting is. Let's look at the other element of the business, which is advertising. One thing we think is really interesting that shows kind of the early side of podcasting is how kind of immature the ad space is. Devin mentioned video podcasting on Spotify. Well, one issue with video podcasting on Spotify right now is that the ad numbers, the CPMs you get, are just much lower than you would get otherwise. We actually removed video from Spotify after we signed with Wondery. And you did too? Yeah. For the same reason. The numbers just weren't there. We're like, we can make significantly more money by just doing our usual kind of dynamic ads and then doing what Spotify was offering. So the advertising side hasn't matured yet. And another way you can visually see that is in who you're listening to. We've all heard the kind of cliche AG1 ads. We've all heard to use coupon code blank to get 15% off cat food for the next 3 months. The reality is your TV advertisers, your pharmaceuticals, your car companies. When was the last time you heard a Jeep ad on a podcast? You haven't. So when those brands start getting in, because they are remarkably conservative, it's pretty amazing when you speak to them. Like we will literally have conversations trying to sell. We were trying to sell a big car company on this the other day. And like their hesitations about podcasting are like as if, they're grandparents and they're discovering some new technology. So once these bigger, more traditional TV buying brands enter the market, that's going to be a huge step up in podcasting. It's going to drive CPMs up. You're going to hear different types of ads. You're going to have fresh money coming into the industry. Because the reality is, and Devin knows this too, what sells best? A TV commercial that you zone out for? Yeah, you can skip podcast ads, but man, people trust the hosts and they buy what the hosts commit to.
One just note on that is that we had our listeners dress up as our sponsors for Halloween. Because if you do it right, people lean in and they absolutely love it.
Yeah, it's a great way. You can have total fun with it.
Any questions? I have one. Oh, we have a ton. Okay, great. Green shirt first.
I think about that a lot. And in developing, I want to stay away from having a final view of what I think the format should be, because it's going to be so based on testing and, again, building a format and building a style around what your strengths are. Morning Brew Daily is a really good example of when do we innovate and when do we keep it the same? Because the value proposition is in, approximately 15 or 30 minutes, depending on if you're listening at 2x or 1x. You can get a rundown of the news, and that is the value proposition of the show. That being said, if we kept everything the same forever, it would start to feel a little bit stale. And so the way that I think about it is, what are experiments that we can do that if they are successful, would add to what the overall value proposition of the show is, not feel like it is significantly changing what the value proposition of the show is. But also in the early stages, I think that testing a bunch of stuff just to see what feels good to you, and if there's feedback that you can get from the audience, is much better than trying to fully develop a format and then launching it and being very stuck to it.
We like the Virgil Abloh 3% rule about taking something and really only tweaking 3% of it to make it work. Now that applies to other things. Like Virgil Abloh is a fashion designer. He was talking about taking like a shoe and changing 3% of it to make it really cool. But we do take a similar rule with the content. The idea mainly being the majority of it we're keeping the same. We are not changing the format. Again, we said with Tim, it is a habit-driven medium. If someone is on the treadmill and they're listening to us, if one day we're 30 minutes long and one day we're 18 minutes long, it's going to like throw off and ruin their whole morning. They need to know that at minute 5, we're on story number 1. At minute 9, we're on story number 2. We're doing the best facts yet by minute 18, and then they are done with their treadmill by the time we've done the shout outs on the show. So format, we really keep the bones the same every day. When it comes to adding a new feature, that's the 3% we kind of have fun and experiment with. We actually just did this yesterday, funnily. The CEO of Harry's Razors is a fan of the show and great guy, Jeff Rader. He pinged us and asked if he could come on to make a product announcement. So we said, you know what? How could you do this? That's a whole new thing. We haven't brought someone on to like announce a product before. How do we fit it in? So we said, you know what? Instead of just doing this randomly, we're going to have him call in with the best fact yet, which is a standard part of our show. So he called in with a fact about razors, just like a listener would call in. And that way our listeners knew the format. They weren't like thrown off by it. The novelty, the 3% twist, was that this was the frickin' Harry CEO, billion-dollar brand, calling in with a fun update. So when we think about adding new formats, we really try to think about how can we maintain the core structure of the show, because podcasting is such a habit-driven medium.
So I have a comment. It's actually for Tim. You were comparing the newsletters to the podcast, and I think there's a lot of truth to there. So me personally, I used to listen to a lot of podcasts, but there's a couple of newsletters that would come out, and some of them were quite lengthy, and some of them should have been clipped. But I personally, this might sound a little weird, but I take it, put it through Speechify, and then I listen to it on the go, or if I'm getting ready. In essence, that is my podcast. So it's a little bit of a blur, but I'd have no commercials.
Yeah, no, that's definitely something you can do. I think as a podcast host, here's the interesting thing Jack and I have found. We're a business news show. Devin was just saying their value proposition is time. For us, the value proposition is that brighter, that feeling of smarter and happier. And I'm blown away by this. But whenever we engage with fans, they, maybe they'll mention a story we did, like the Abercrombie wedding dress, or a really creative takeaway we do, because everything we do involves pop culture. We just did a takeaway about a Jay-Z lyric that reminded us of the Costco's earnings report. So, yeah, they may remember that too. But the main thing that they tell us they love about the show is that they're hanging out with Jack and me. That Jack and I have been best friends for 15 years, and they know that Jack drinks coffee every day, and if I have caffeine, my head will explode. And they know the inside jokes that once Jack mispronounced something about a Frappuccino, and now whenever we mention Frappuccinos, it's Chapafrinos. And those are the things that really resonate with people. So I think that's a totally great way that works for you. And that's totally fine. I love that you've done that innovation with the newsletters. I guess from a creator perspective, for anyone considering a podcast, the funny thing we've noticed, and this is what makes us lean into the brand and have gone all in on podcasting, is it's a host-driven medium. People connect with the hosts and the personalities of it. And as a creator, our responsibility is to be that unique personality in their day who also, even though we've never met, is great friends with them. And I think that's something that maybe separates a podcast from the audio format of a newsletter.
There is a utility and affinity spectrum in a lot of this stuff. And the reality is that no one here and no one in the world needs Morning Brew Daily or the best one yet to get business news. Nobody needs either of us to get business news, and yet millions of people have chosen to get their business news from us because of exactly what he's saying, is that it is something that creates that connection. And so there are going to be people, again, it's all about the individual media diet of what do you want out of how you're consuming the information. And if it's further on that utility spectrum, then there are going to be a lot more options. And if it's something that you just really want that connection, then that is where you can really build those parasocial in a good way, not a bad way, but those kind of parasocial relationships where people do feel like they're your friend.
I'm curious if you think it's harder to build a personal brand in a faceless medium like podcasts. And do you do yourself a disservice if you don't ever add a visual element or videography to maybe increase your growth?
We run into Yetis every now and then. That's the name of our audience members. Best one yet. So we call our audience the Yetis. It's the nickname. Or they call themselves the Besties. It's actually a funny divide in the Yeti Bestie community. And I work at the Ferry Building. That's where we have our studio set up. And I run into our audience members every now and then. And they know us because we have an Instagram page. So they've seen our faces. Literally half the time, they say, wait, are you Nick or are you Jack? Or they'll say, wow, I didn't know you looked like that. Or someone literally told me the other day that they met Kai Ryssdal for the first time ever, or they saw a picture of him. Kai Ryssdal, great podcaster. And they thought he was Asian, but he's not Asian. And they were shocked because they've been envisioning him as Asian for like 8 years. And now they know what he looks like and he's not. And so I kind of add all that up and it makes me think about how, visuals are important, and we've bet on YouTube and video and visuals and Instagram going forward as a way to really engage people. But at the end of the day, we're talking radio here, and most people never even knew what their radio hosts look like. I listen to 1010 Wins News. I listened when I was growing up to Z100 in New York, Q1043 Classic Rock. I have no idea what those DJs look like, but man, I feel like I was best friends with them. So, I think podcasting is the same as radio in that way. It's just that now we have the added benefit of video. So, yeah, maybe you get seen or, brand deals come to you in a certain way. But at the end of the day, I wouldn't be too worried about that. The great thing about great audio is that it feels visual.
I have a question about the kind of part about connection you mentioned. Someone made a comment about putting some text into audio, and we know things like Notebook, LLM. Although right now the podcast they created kind of sucks, but I think in the future maybe AI is able to generate some witty hosts that can come up with their own original stories. And I like the Nick, you mentioned you do shout out to the audience, and I also saw that you did a like in person kind of show. Is it? Yeah, my question is with the future maybe impact of AI, or maybe I don't know, maybe multiverse will come back. How do you add that uniqueness and have that connection to your audience? Do you think the future of podcasts will be like in person? Are we gonna go on tours, be like the Taylor Swift of the podcast kingdom?
Yeah, that's a differentiator from AI you're describing. To answer your question, which is mainly like how is podcasting going to adjust in an age of AI? I'd kind of go back to something originally that Devin, Tim, and I were saying, which was not focusing on the competition. When it comes to like AI podcast hosts, we try not to focus on them too much. If AI is going to create podcast hosts, there's not much we can do about that. So we kind of are just like, we'll keep focusing on what we do best until that day comes. We do use AI though. We use it as a research tool. It saves us a lot of time. I use ChatGPT instead of Google now. I don't even use Google search. So AI is a powerful part of our production cycle. But when it comes to differentiating as a podcast host, I think it's the things we were talking about that drive the connection intimately with our listeners. It's that Jack and I have personality quirks going back 20 years with each other that we share on the show that make you feel endeared to us and provide what every human being really wants in this world, which is comfort and friendship. And then I think, there are more strategic bets you can make. Like we're doing a live show in Chicago at the Vic Theater. We've got a couple exciting CEOs booked, and we're going to be on stage. And when we did our last live show in New York, it's a thrilling experience. We basically make business news feel like a rock show. And that's something that's a differentiator for us, I think, compared to AI. It's something that we're not particularly worried about right now. Maybe AI will become more of a threat longer term, but for now, we're focusing on doing exactly what we do, which is building intimate connections every day.
And media has always been a connection of people to people, right? And so there are going to be AI podcasts. There are already AI podcasts. Again, if you look at the affinity to the utility spectrum I was talking about, there's going to be some very good and useful, I'm sure, AI podcasts that can deliver information. And I'm sure there will be, as things develop, there'll be witty ones, funny ones that can, eat up and then copy a lot of what's going on. But the reality is that it's not going to replace the connection that people are looking for. And so if you're able to build that, you can then build a community. If people are aware that something is AI and computer generated, they are going to know at the end of the day that it's not a person that they have a connection with. That doesn't mean that people will not consume it. That doesn't mean that people will not form connections with non-human entities. That probably will happen. But there is going to be a space for building that actual media being human to human connection. That is what the entire creator economy and the thesis behind it is built on, is that, large media got to a point where it didn't feel very connected to audiences in a lot of ways. Creators were able to come in and fill up a lot of space because that connection became as important as the content in a lot of situations. If you look at journalism in general, a lot of the incumbent journalism companies are having a lot of problems because they didn't adapt to a world in which trust has shifted so significantly, especially for younger demographics, where who they trust and how they want information does not really align with the traditional ways that journalism has delivered that. And so obviously the ethics and a lot of the rules around journalism are very important, but the way that it gets delivered has changed so significantly. The trust element, the connection element, the affinity element are what, as a person, you're going to always have that advantage over. And so, again, I would not worry about it because it's inevitable, but you're also not going to be able to make a better AI podcast than OpenAI is. And so you have to figure out, like, what is, again, your path. And there's always going to be a path to victory if you build around what your strengths are.
More context, Daliana was senior data scientist at Amazon Web Services. She has a podcast, Data Scientist Show, and she's nearing 300,000 followers on LinkedIn. Wow. And I think the AI question. In fact, if you can quickly introduce yourself and you ask a question, that would help quiet.
My name is Rachel. I'm a food creator. And my question, I'm curious to hear your thoughts about the fear that I think any creator has, whatever the medium may be, which is the fear of slipping into irrelevancy. And, I think back to a season of my life where I used to listen to the All In podcast every single Saturday morning. It was part of the routine, to your point, but it's become irrelevant to me. I just find it impossible to listen to anymore. And so for you guys, when you think about your content, how do you think about staying relevant and connected to your audience? Like, how do you just think about that? How do you deal with like the emotional or mental load with staying relevant with your audience and like the fear of losing relevancy with them?
Your first name again?
Rachel.
Okay, Rachel, just two quick questions. First of all, that's not your fault on All In. That went from a business show to a political show.
Yeah.
So it actually changed, in my opinion.
Mm-hmm.
I consume every podcast out there, including like food podcasts, and that one made it one of the biggest transitions I've ever seen. Yeah, they jumped the shark. Second, what's your favorite restaurant in San Francisco?
It's hard for me to pick favorites.
Okay. You tell us after the interview. I'm just curious as a food critic.
Mhm.
And then finally, to answer your question, I mean, look, every summer, Jack and I take a 2-week vacation in August, and I get like jittery before because I'm like, there is no reason after our 2-week vacation I come back and everyone tunes in again. Remember, podcasting, you have to be proactive. People have to go into the app and listen to you. It's not like a newsletter where you go to them. So it requires them to make an effort. That's a barrier. That's friction. So every day, every year in August, first day of vacation, I get that feeling. It doesn't even matter how big our audience is. I get that feeling. Why would they show up? But in the data, funny thing, they always show up. In fact, our numbers are usually higher after vacation because, frankly, sometimes people need a break from us. It's healthy for them, felt healthy for us to take 2 weeks off. So that's okay. But the way that we try to approach always staying relevant is actually kind of a core part of our brand, which is we're a business news show. We used to be called Market Snacks. Then when Robinhood acquired us, we were called Snacks. And the idea was that that was a very value proposition name. We make news into a snack for you. When we left Robinhood, brought our podcast with us, got back to entrepreneurship with the same audience, we rebranded to the best one yet because we really believed that every time we created a show, that day's episode, and I believe this about today's episode, which was episode 1,580 something, I believe this was the best episode Jack and I have ever created. And I honestly believe it. And Jack and I found that when we say at the beginning of every show, today's pod is the best one yet, which is our catchphrase, we decided to name that our entire brand because we're like, that is a feeling that transcends business news. It transcends our show. It transcends to everything our ambitious Zillennial audience is about. It's about making that the best one yet. So the best way I think you can avoid this irrelevance concern is if you honestly believe, and I think you really do because you are a creator, that last thing you created is the best thing you created, then the audience will turn up for you. If you get into a mindset of, I still got to tweak this, I'm not certain, maybe I'm flattening out, once the mindset shifts, the content changes, and then the audience changes too.
It's very well said because momentum doesn't exist in media like it used to, where, linear cable television is still there, right? And obviously it's falling off a cliff, but it's going to take a really long time. Audiences earned every single time that you're connecting with them. And on the platforms that are engagement based and on the people having to take a proactive choice to engage with you, you do have to think a lot about that momentum that you have and that is growing has to be earned constantly. And so that mentality of, I like to talk a lot about with my teams about the idea of insularity, is that it's really important that the people who have been with you for many years are equally as welcome into an episode as someone who is checking you out for the very first time. And if you think about the idea of you don't want your brand or your content to start to get too insular, that can be some way to protect your ability to continue to grow your audience as well, because the inside jokes, the callbacks, all that sort of stuff are so important to driving engagement and loyalty. But if you overdo too much in that world, then you're going to get to a point where you have stopped being accepting to new audiences. And so as you are building and as you are growing, you have to be thinking about, on the one hand, how are we really getting it good for our day ones, the people who have been here forever, the people who absolutely love us, know everything about us. And if this is the first time anyone is ever seeing something that I am making, are they going to like it? Are they going to know what I'm doing? And are they going to become that ride or die? And those are, two kind of different tracks that you have to be thinking about for the same piece of content, but are really important to have that double mentality for what you're creating.
Yeah, so Nick, I'm a big fan of yours, and Devin, I just subscribed to the Morning Brew. Piggybacking on this, I've noticed like for Nick, whenever you do your show, whenever you take a break or a trip, or when you have like your kid, you always announce it to us and tell us that what's going on. I really do feel connected. Like I'm part of your life, and like every day is a morning routine that I listen to the best one yet. Do you also have? I have two questions. Do you have like a time where you meet with other creators and brainstorm how to improve the show or do the show better? And then two, I've noticed like for um, basically the timing of like regular like journalism, NPR, the time is only 2 minutes, right? Because the people can't pay attention to like, oh, this is all news, right? But for you, for example, you blend entertainment with journalism, and that like to your point of like wasting people's time or like the time that you've spent is valuable. So, like what would the question is, what is the basic that would you hold that true? Like short, but for like news is only like very like 2 minutes, like short time, and then for entertainment purposes, it can be like as long as 1 hour, as long as people are engaged.
Absolutely. First of all, remind me your first name again. Ramon. I got the handle. So Ramon, a few things. First of all, thank you so much for enjoying the show and being a Yeti. Much appreciated. I'll tell Jack you said hi. Second, I'm so glad you appreciate that, as we kind of like work the audience with us as we're going through our lives and like having kids, or as we call them, IBOs, initial baby offerings. And, for Jack and I, it's important to share, but do so in a way that's thoughtful and not oversharing. We really like we really believe our audience, and we're friends with our audience too. We just unfortunately don't get to see them as much. And so what we really try to do is weave you in strategically throughout the show is by really just having Jackson, my honest friendship on the pod and letting that shine through. And always trying to remember, hey, but at the end of the day, we are a business news show, so we have to have a balance. But I'm so glad the balance connects well with you. When it comes to, kind of getting feedback, kind of your first question, like us connecting with other creators, great advice heard once. The only two people creators should care about getting advice from is other creators and their fans. Everyone else doesn't matter. Like advertisers don't care what they think of the content. In fact, they're usually wrong. Production companies we met with, not on the creating side. They're on the technical side. Don't care what they think. Honestly, just don't care what they think. But fans, we listen aggressively to feedback from fans. Other creators, we listen aggressively to what their tactics are. Those are the only two people to focus on as a creator, which you are. And then the final part of your question was around, remind me, it was about
Like, like record here.
yeah, with entertainment. Yeah, entertainment is a powerful word, and it's also a very subjective word. What Jack and I do is we have a brand strategy, and we put this in place after we left Robinhood. I'm sure Morning Brew has one too, where we have a bunch of guiding words. We have 4 North Star words. Every story, every piece of merch, every partnership we do, our logo, it's all connected to these very 4 specific brand words that have a tension with each other. And at the end of the day, it ladders up into the idea of brightness, like I mentioned. So everything we do has to touch these. But what's important is that it never goes too far in one direction. So 2 of our guiding brand words out of the 4 are, one is zesty and one is legit. So in every story Jack and I do, the word zesty, which is another word for entertainment, has to be there. But so does the word legit. So like you'll never hear Jack and I do a story that's purely an entertainment story. And you'll never hear Jack and I do a story that's purely a heavy financial story. We need to have the balance, the tension in there. So like I mentioned the other day, we did a story about Costco that was also about connecting it to a Jay-Z song. Perfect example of how we wanted to have the entertainment side, the zesty side, the Jay-Z reference. That one lyric from his song really did explain Costco's earnings. And we wanted to have the legit side. We talked about Costco's growth, where the stock was, and what the earnings were. And so for us, blending the entertainment in is important, as long as it's on brand and as long as it's hitting the right balance. If we went too far on the entertainment side, people would think we were just being maybe a little too silly. If we go too far on the legit side, maybe a little too boring. So it's about having a balance as opposed to just pure entertainment.
Hi, I'm David Miyoshi. I'm creating a YouTube channel that is essentially an Oprah for personal growth. And you mentioned earlier that we could DM you for growth hacks. I'd be curious, are there ones that I mean, you guys have shared a lot generously. I really, really appreciate it. It's been amazing. Are there ones that you haven't mentioned that, especially for early creators, that you would say, like, this is really pivotal? And then on the flip side, are there mistakes that you made early on that you would say, hey, watch for these traps?
In the YouTube space, are you creating long form or short form primarily?
It's I'm gonna test both, but primarily starting shorter side, like shorts and then 5-10 minutes.
So what I will say is that growth on YouTube is easier in the shorts sphere. So if you are building with an eye towards how you like, if you have a choice, basically, using the shorts to start to just seed any sort of audience is going to likely be a quicker growth. The challenge in doing that is that a lot of the value from using YouTube comes from the fact that you can do both of those things. And there can be a desire to over optimize based on puffy sorts of metrics, especially in those shorts feeds. So as you are creating that short form content on YouTube, you want it to perform, but you also want it to be true to what you want your overall brand and what you want your overall content to be, because then you're going to have a bridge to longer form content later. And if those things are very connected, that'll be a great growth tool for you. If they are not connected, or again, if you feel like you're over optimizing towards performance, but that performance is to people who are not the people that you necessarily want to watch, then it's actually going to be a distraction for you. Collaboration on YouTube and other platforms is one of the things that really can drive audiences. And it's not really a hack. It's, you're here right now. If you can find people who are doing something that is similar to you, that are at similar stages, and being able to work together, it is something that by banding together, you're going to have, more interested audience that, if you're cross collaborating, if you're sending people back and forth, that does help lift all of those boats. One thing that I will say, and I know this is not what you're asking, is that you should stay away from any hacks that are actual hacks, because long term, it's not going to be healthy. There are a lot of unhealthy things that people will, sell you as the path to growth that are actually going to kneecap your ability to build a really meaningful brand. And so, as I was saying before, focus in on, is the content what you really want it to be? And if someone is coming in, is it what you want the representation of your content to be? And then go find those more organic, kind of harder, but more organic opportunities, because long term, when you look back in a couple of years, you'll be very happy that you didn't take, again, a hack based approach. And there are a lot of people on Twitter and a lot of platforms that would sell you a lot of unhealthy tools.
Well, how do you feel, Devin, about like CTAs at the end of shows? Do you guys think about those? Do you find those helpful? Like, or even in shorts, do you guys do like a follow for more, remember to catch us here? Like, does that?
It can. I have found that usually helps more when you have scale than at the very beginning. But it is something that, as I was saying before, using content just as promotion is not a good idea. Asking your audience to do something, if it's something that makes sense for them to do, is a very good idea.
Everyone, let's please give a round of applause for Devin and Nick.